Thank you for joining us at Community on Demand. Today's message is presented by Dan Greer. Dan holds a doctorate from Gray School of Theology and is the senior pastor here at Community Church. This message was recorded during a live Sunday morning service at Community. Let's listen in as Dan begins.
I talked last week on Easter Sunday about, bad news, good news, and everything. But the truth of the matter is, guys, we live in the greatest country on the planet right now. We live in the richest nation, maybe of all time. I mean, we have a GDP of almost $27 trillion. I think it's like $26.7 trillion. In comparison with China, who comes in a distant second at 17 trillion, and way above Russia, who's like several steps down, behind India and Germany and several others, at only a mere $2 trillion GDP. So we're the richest country on the planet right now. And we've got some of the most magnificent scenery in the world. I mean, do you realize this? We've got 83,000 miles of oceanic shoreline. Amazing beaches and beauty that we have. And we have, we've got Mount McKinley, we've got Hawaii, we've got the Grand Canyon, and of course we've got the mighty Mississippi, I mean, we've just got it all. It is wonderful, magnificent scenery that we have. And we live in the most livable place in the country, in our area here. In fact, our town here we ranked number one two consecutive years of being the most livable town in the country. I mean, we really, really have it good. Here's something else. We have the highest concentration of Christian population in the world. Even though it's declining some, do you realize that we have 246 million people in the United States that profess that they're Christians? That's like 79% of the population. That's still pretty strong, even though it has been declining for a while. It's still pretty strong. And we have the highest concentration of billionaires on earth. Do you realize that 814 billionaires here in our country? I guess if you got $1 billion, you want to live somewhere, here's the place to live, I mean, it's amazing while millions are trying to escape places like China and Afghanistan and Russia and Venezuela and Haiti and Honduras, millions are trying to get in to the United States to have a better life. We live in the greatest country in the world, yet there seems to be a lot of brokenness all around us. Ever thought about that? People are struggling with broken hearts, with broken dreams, with broken relationships, with broken trust, with broken families, with broken marriages. I've got to admit, I've struggled with brokenness. This year, my heart has been broken. Some of my dreams have been broken. My spirit has been wounded. My emotions have been damaged. I've experienced brokenness because of one thing. Because, are you ready for this? Satan wants to break me. And he wants to break you. And so what he'll do is he'll use everything and everybody that he can to break me down and to break you down. We all, unfortunately, we all experience brokenness. But the bad thing is that sometimes we even cause brokenness. We are the reason that people feel broken sometimes. And here's what happens when we experience brokenness. We tend to withdraw, we pull back, and sometimes we just say, I quit. I'm not going to do it anymore. When we cause brokenness, we damage relationships, we hurt people, we sometimes even ruin lives. And that's what Satan wants. He wants to use us against each other. He wants us to cause brokenness. He wants us to feel broken. If he can break us, that's exactly what he wants to do. It takes servant leadership to heal damaged emotions, repair a wounded spirit, and restore what's been broken. And I think one of the greatest examples of servant leadership in the Bible is a man by the name of Nehemiah. In fact, there's a whole book written after him, and I think that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to just jump into the book of Nehemiah and study a series that called Restoring What's Been Broken. If you don't mind, turn to Nehemiah chapter 1. Let's read a couple of verses to get us kicked off today. Got to get set in this series. In Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "It came to pass in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan the citadel, that Hanani, one of my brethren, came with men from Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped, who had survived the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem." Now, Nehemiah's story begins in September of October, about 444 BC, in the Persian capital of Shushan. Where exactly is that? Well, that would be located on the eastern shore of modern-day Iran of the Persian Gulf. That's where the capital was. He lived in privilege and luxury and was a highly trusted official of King Artaxerxes, who at that time was basically the king of the world. He was one of the most trusted servants of Artaxerxes. But Nehemiah was a Jew. He wasn't really a Persian. He was a Jew, and he had relatives that lived 1,000 miles away in Jerusalem. And on a trip, maybe it was a business trip, our story begins with a visit from some of his brothers who lived in Jerusalem and had traveled to Persia. And so Nehemiah's pretty excited about hearing how things are there at Persia. I mean, they built the temple and it ought to be going pretty good. So he asked them, "How are things going back home, guys?" And they said, "Not so good." What? Well, and they reported to him that things had been beaten down, broken down, and burned down. It's really not the news that he wanted to hear. That was bad news. And so as we continue to read here, we find these three things happening. First of all, people had been beaten down. In verse number 3, first part, it says, "And they said to me, the survivors who are left from the captivity in the province are in great distress and reproach." To give you a little bit of background, most of you know this, so it's kind of a review for you, but about 150 years, 160 years earlier, Jerusalem had been invaded by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon about 3 times. And each time that he would invade Israel or Jerusalem, he would take captives back to Babylon. And what he would do is he wouldn't get like the prisoners and the poor people. He would get the creme de la creme. he would get the royalty. He would get the best, smartest people, and he would take them to Babylon, and he'd send them to the university, and he'd educate them, and then he would use them in his kingdom there. He took people like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Ezekiel, and he trained them there in the area. And 150 years later, Nehemiah ends up as a leader there in Persia. I think that what Nebuchadnezzar must have done is he must have read that passage of scripture that remember the song that Deborah wrote in the book of Judges? And in that song, she had one phrase that says, "When leaders lead in Israel, when people willingly offer themselves, bless the Lord. Man, things are going to be good when leaders lead." And Nebuchadnezzar said, "That's not a bad idea. I think I'll take some of those leaders and I'll bring them to my country. I'll teach them some things and they will become leaders in my country." And they did. Daniel becomes like the prime minister of Babylon. And here this guy, Nebuchadnezzar, becomes like the most trusted servant of King Artaxerxes. And you know what happens? History teaches us that when there is a leadership void in any area, in a country or anything, where there is a leadership void, tyrannical people will begin to take over. They will begin to oppress, exploit, abuse, and cause people to get into distress. One Bible dictionary defines this word distress, trying to illustrate it, and it says it's the word distress is like an aircraft that's going down. It's in distress. Or a ship that's taken on water, it's in distress. Or a person that can't breathe, they're in distress. That's the kind of emotion that this word distress carries. And like I said, when there's a leadership void, and there was one in Jerusalem, it was causing great distress and reproach because tyrants were moving in and taking control and started beating people down. So the brothers have said, hey, look, people are in distress. They're being beat down all the time. I don't know how long they're going to last. The second thing he says, that walls had been broken down. The second part of the same verse, the wall of Jerusalem is also broken down. Now, the walls around Jerusalem, if you know your history there, the walls around Jerusalem were built by David and Solomon and Hezekiah. And it goes all the way back 3,000 years where they built the walls around Jerusalem. And if you look at all the data, these walls tended to be 25 to 30 feet high, about 22 feet wide, and around 2.5 miles around. So they're pretty significant walls. In fact, throughout history, the enemies of the Jewish people struggled to get to them because of the walls. In fact, but at this time, he says the walls were broken down. You know, even Nebuchadnezzar, when he went and fought against Israel, it took somewhere between 18 months and 30 months for him to finally breach the walls and break the walls down and get through. But what was happening now, and what the brothers were reporting to him, is that and we'll pick it up in the story a little bit later on, is that there were people that were infiltrating and they were intimidating and they were oppressing and they were exploiting people in Israel, and that's what was causing the distress. Some of their names, we'll pick them up. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, and the Arabians and the Ammonites. And so for the first time, I mean, he's been in this little bubble there in Persia, but now he's beginning to get the picture. He's learned that the walls around Jerusalem are broken down and exposing people to attacks and raids and oppression and infiltration and invasion by their enemies. Now it's got boom, boom, but then there's a sucker punch. The people were being beaten down, the walls had been broken down, and the gates had been burned down. The latter part of the verse, and the gates are burned with fire. We probably don't realize this. I mean, some of us may, but during the Old Testament times, the gates were very significant for commerce, economy, and settling disputes and legal matters. In fact, when we get into the story, there's going to be a lot of attention on the gates. And Nehemiah is going to start naming some of the gates that they're building, and they would build back the fish gate. You say, what's so important about the fish gate? That's where the fish markets of the economy were that bring the fish in from the Mediterranean Sea. And that was that part. What about the sheep gate? That was the religious part. That's where they'd bring the sheep in to sacrifice to the temple. What about the refuge gate? That's a really important gate. That's not what they called it, and I can't say it up here on the platform. You'll have to go read your Bible, okay? But the refuge gate, the other gate, goes out to the Valley of Hinnom. That's where they take their trash out. Very important one. And the old gate was where they settled legal matters, where they would gather and take care of disputes and settlements. And of course, there was the east gate that he talks about, and that's looking for the Messiah to come. So these gates were important, but they were burnt down. They couldn't rebuild them. They were burnt down. And when they burned down, the judicial system, the economic system, the religious system, and all these systems are being destroyed, it brings chaos into the city. Does that have a familiar ring to you? So when they came and they said, Nehemiah, the people are in distress, the people have been beat down, the walls are broken down, and the gates are burned down. It hit him like a ton of bricks. He understood what was going on. He understood that things were collapsing in his Jerusalem. You know, we experience a lot of that stuff in a sense today. And we see it. We look around us today and we see much of the same thing. People are beat down. People are depressed. A lot of folks end it. A lot of veterans end it. Our safety is breaking down, our borders and things. I mean, I don't have to talk about our economy. Our values, our justice systems are being burned down. Our Constitution is being shredded. We have all those things going on. So we kind of realize that, but when we put it together, it's kind of overwhelming, and we think, oh my goodness, have we gone too far? What do we do? What do we do? Well, Nehemiah, give us an example. What did you do? If you're a servant leader and successful, what did you do? That's what we're going to look at. Because he does something that we usually don't do. Number one, he responds with grief. In verse 4, the very first part. So it was when I heard these words that I sat down and wept and mourned for many days. You know that in his life of Persian privilege and luxury, Nehemiah was sort of in this Woodlands, Spring, North Houston type bubble. He didn't see the things that were outside. He didn't know about these things. He didn't see the little children that were being taken off. He didn't see all of the things that were going on. He didn't know about them. He didn't see the distress and the danger and the devastation of men and women, boys and girls. He just saw the beauty around him. And so this really hit him. Here's the word wept. We're thinking anyway. That's not the word. It's bakah. And the word literally means to bewail, to cry out, to lament, and to weep continually. It's as if he fell down and said, oh, no, no. I remember calling my son one time. My dad was on his deathbed, and we went and gathered around him, and it was a beautiful thing, and it was a difficult thing, but the family gathered around, and then the family went home, and I stayed there all night with my sister, and then you could sense him drifting off. About 4 o'clock in the morning, I got up, walked over to the bed, and just was there praying, and then a brother and a sister and a mother, and pretty soon everybody gathered around, and it was really a bittersweet time for Dad to pass away. My son was still living here in the Woodlands, and so everything was settled. I went out in the hallway, and I called him, and he had gone through what we had been going through, just getting ready. And when I called him, I said, Tim, Papa's gone. He, on the other end of the phone, said, no, oh no, and he began crying out loud, early in the morning, and bewailing, and I think that's the idea that we hear here with Nehemiah. He internalized their distress and responded with compassion and emotion and crying and care. He felt it deep down inside. Jesus said something in that 24th chapter of Matthew when he's giving the Olivet Discourse and describing the way it's going to be at the end of time. He writes these words here: many will be offended. Yeah, I can see that happening. Will betray one another, will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. I see that happening. And then he says this: and because lawlessness will abound, which we see, the love of many will wax cold. Why do we put those two together? Because what's happening to us right now in our culture as crime is rising, we're becoming desensitized. We're becoming calloused. We're becoming cold-hearted. We're losing our compassion. We're losing our care. And that's exactly what Jesus described would happen as we come down to the end of the age. But Peter writes later on and gives us sort of a behavioral instruction of how to counter that. And in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse number 8, he says this, "Finally, all of you, be of one mind, having compassion for one another. Love as brothers. Be tenderhearted, be courteous, not returning evil for evil or reveling, but on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you were called to this, that you might inherit a blessing." We've got to be different. We have to have compassion. Our motto is a place where people care. We have got to show that. And as we begin to notice folks around us who are in distress, when we begin to see systems break down, systems being burnt down, and people being burnt out, we've got to shed a tear. We've got to internalize. We've got to feel the pain that they're going through. So the first thing he does is he responds with grief. The second thing he does is he repents to God. Look down at the second part of the verse. He says, "I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven." Having grieved over the distress and brokenness of his people, Nehemiah understands that he is going to need some supernatural intervention. And he wants to clear the path with the God of heaven. So he enters into a comprehensive two-part prayer. We could probably break it down to 4 parts, but I pulled it in. I'm going to give it concentrated to you here, okay? Number 1, he makes a confession. Let's read on, verse number 6. "I pray before you now," talking to God, "day and night for the children of Israel, for your servants, and confess the sins of the children of Israel, which we have sinned against you. Both my father's house and I have sinned." Nehemiah, the king's right-hand man, the cupbearer, the most trusted person probably underneath the king in the Persian Empire, makes a confession, "I've sinned. My family has sinned." And he opens up to the Lord and humbles himself. And then he goes on to tell what he has done. So let's continue to see what did you do? What did you did? I love that. What did you did? "We have acted very corruptly against you and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, nor the ordinances which you've commanded your servants Moses. Remember, I pray, the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though some of you were cast out to the farthest part of heavens, yet I will gather them from there and bring them to this place I have chosen as a dwelling place for my name." God made a covenant. He made a contract. He made a promise with Israel. Some people call it the Mosaic promise. Keep my commandments, be blessed. Break my commandments, be broken. Keep my commandments, be blessed. Break my commandments, be broken. Someone asked me the other day, don't you need to keep the commandments to get saved? No, you need to keep the commandments for your relationship with God, for your fellowship with God, for your fellowship with other people. Return to my commandments, you'll be blessed. Nehemiah confesses that he confesses to God that both he and his people have sinned and broken God's commandments. So the first step toward restoration is confession. We must confess. What we've got to do is we just got to get before the Lord like we did a couple of weeks ago and say, Lord, my heart is open. I know things are not working right. I'm not sure what's going on. Is there something in my life that I'm not seeing. If I got a blind spot, show me. Bring someone in my life to show me the blind spot so that I can confess, so that I can restore my relationship with you. So that's the first thing he did. He responds, he repents, he makes a confession, and then he makes a commitment. Verse 11. O Lord, I pray, please let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant. Underline servant, if you write in your Bible. And to the prayer of your servants who desire to fear your name. And let your servant prosper this day, I pray, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer. He uses the word servant 3 times, talking to him about himself. Having confessed, repented of his unfaithfulness, he can think clearly. He's thinking, I can be used of God. I can be used of God to restore what's been broken. But I can't do it by myself. I've got to have supernatural help to do that. So what he's doing here, by using this word servant, he's offering himself in service to God. God, do you want to use me here? Open my mind. Give me vision. Help me to see clearly. I'm the king's cupbearer. Oftentimes, he'll turn to me and say, what do you think about that? I give him advice. Lord, give me favor in this man. Give me mercy, I pray, in the sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer. He mentions that he's the king's, this man he's referring to is Artaxerxes, king of Persia. He understands that as the cupbearer, he is in a unique position that no one else is, where he can be used of God to help those in distress and brokenness. Nehemiah will focus on something tangible. He will focus upon building the wall. We're going to see something magnificent happen on a building program where he built the wall. And he will become a visionary. He will imagine Jerusalem with the walls and the security and the gates and judgment going on, and men and women doing their marketing, and the kids playing in the street and safety all around. He can envision that, and he will look around for resources to make that happen, so he can be a part of restoring that which has been broken. We're a lot like Nehemiah. We live in the greatest country, the greatest state, the most livable place in the world, but we sense that things are broken. We sense that people are broken. We, believe it or not, God wants to use us to restore what's been broken. Author and teacher Howard Hendricks up at Dallas Theological Seminary tells the story of a Christian man, young Christian student, that kind of got crossways and went away from the Lord and was gone for quite some time doing his own thing. And then someone worked with him and brought him back to the Lord. And so Dr. Hendricks went and talked with him and said, young man, I want to ask you something. What was it like as you strayed away from the Lord? And the young man said, it felt like being in deep water. He felt like it being out in the ocean, and I was drowning, and I needed help. And I would come up gasping, help. And he said, as I'd come up and look, he said, I could see my friends in my mind. I could see my friends on the shore hurling Bible verses at me and accusations and say, well, you shouldn't have done this. And here's what you need to do. And just yelling at me from the shore. It hurt. He said, but one of my friends grabbed a life jacket, jumped in the water, swam out to me. He said, I fought him. He said, I didn't want anything to do with you people. He said, I pushed him. And he said, then he come back at me, and I hit him. And he come back at me, and finally he spun me around, and he put the life jacket on me, and he grabbed me by the collar, and he swam and got me back to shore. And he's the reason that I'm back in God's graces today. That's who we are. People are in distress. People are hurting. Walls have been broken down. Systems have been burned down. People have been burned out. All these things that we can spiritualize here today. And here we are, like Nehemiah. And I want to encourage you. Let me close with a couple of questions here. First of all, you may say, hey, look, I'm the one that feels like I'm drowning right now. I'm the one that can't breathe. I'm the one that feels like my plane is going down. I'm the one that's taking, I don't know what to do. Are you in distress? Do you feel like that? Do you feel like you're deep in water? Some of you know someone that is beat down, broken down, and burnt out. And so the question is, are you staying on the shoreline, pointing, criticizing, condemning, telling them what they ought to do? Or would you jump in and be part of the rescue?
On behalf of Pastor Dan and the folks at Community, thank you for joining us today at Community on Demand. Feel free to share this link with others, and please know you are always welcome to be our guest during a live service any Sunday morning at our campus in the Woodlands, Texas. For more information, just click on the link www.cbcwoodlands.org. I hope you will again join us at Community on Demand.